Every time you say you're a stockholder, or you tally up a bill, or you settle the score, you're speaking a language that was carved into sticks of willow 800 years ago. Stop for a moment and listen to those words. Stock, tally, score, teller. They sound like money words. They feel modern, like something born in a bank. But they are older than the coins in your pocket, and stranger still, they are wooden. Every one of them began as a notch in a piece of wood. So let the world tilt a little. Imagine your bank balance is not a number glowing on a screen. Imagine it as a stick, a real stick, the kind you might snap off a tree, and along its edge a row of cuts, some deep, some shallow, each one meaning a different amount. To know how rich you are, you would not look, you would feel. You would run your thumb along the wood and read your wealth by touch. That is not a fairy tale. That was the accounting system of a kingdom, so come meet the thing itself. A tally stick is simply a length of wood notched to record a number, a debt owed or a payment made. The size of the notch told you the size of the sum. A wide cut for a large amount, a thin one for a small amount. You could read the whole story with your fingertips in the dark. But here's the clever part. The part that turns a stick into something almost magical. Once the notches were cut, the stick was split. Not across, but lengthwise, straight down the middle, one cut becoming two long halves. And because wood never splits the same way twice, each half was unique. The grain, the bumps, the little imperfections, all of it. Each half could only ever fit one other half in the whole world, its true partner. So two people, two strangers even, could each walk away with one piece. The notches matched, the grain matched, and to prove the debt was real, you simply press the two halves back together. If they fit, the debt was true. If they did not fit, someone was lying. You cannot fake the grain of wood. You cannot carve a forgery that nature already signed. So forgery was not made hard. It was made nearly impossible. And the two halves even had names. The longer piece was called the stock. It went to the one who was owed the money, the creditor. The shorter piece was called the foil. It went to the one who owed, the debtor. Hold that first word a moment. The stock? The half kept by the person holding the wealth. That is where the word stockholder comes from. Someone who holds the stock. The next time you hear about stocks rising and falling, picture it. A little stick of willow, held by the person who is owed. The market still carries a splinter of the forest in its name. Now here's where the story opens up, because a single farmer might use a tally to remember a single debt. But England did this with everything. The whole treasury of a kingdom ran on notched wood. For about 600 years, 6 centuries of tax and debt and royal spending, all of it riding on sticks. Coins existed, paper existed, and still the kingdom reached for the willow. How did they all agree on what a notch was worth? For that, you have to go back to a man writing around the year 1177. His name was Richard FitzNeal, also called Richard FitzNigel. He was the royal treasurer, and he wrote it all down in a work called the Dialogus de Scaccario. In plain words, the dialogue concerning the Exchequer. The Exchequer being simply the royal counting house, the place where money was reckoned, and in it he gives you the grammar of the notches, a kind of alphabet of cuts. 1,000 pounds was a cut as thick as the palm of your hand, 100 pounds the breadth of a thumb, 20 pounds the width of your little finger, and a single pound? A swollen barley corn. That is the width of a single fat grain of barley. A shilling was thinner still, and a penny was the smallest of all, just a single cut, with no wood taken away. So your whole fortune was spelled out in fingers and thumbs and grains of barley. It is hard not to smile at that. A government budget you could measure against your own hand. Now you might be picturing something grand. A heavy, ceremonial baton, gold-tipped, the size of a king's staff. It was nothing like that. These sticks were small. The historian Caroline Shenton, who spent years among the records of Parliament, describes them beautifully. Roughly as long, she says, as the span from the tip of your index finger to the tip of your thumb. That's small. Cut most often from willow or hazel, soft common wood from an English hedgerow, and yet that little splinter of hedge was the law. A tally was binding proof of debt accepted in a court. You could stand before a judge and hold up your half of a stick, and the stick would speak for you. Now watch what happens next, because this is the quiet turn. At first, a tally just remembered a debt that already existed. But people are clever, and money is restless. Soon the crown began cutting tallies for taxes not yet collected, a promise that a future harvest of tax would pay this stick. These were called tallies of assignment, a way of spending money before it had even arrived. And because each stick was unforgeable, you could hand it to someone else. You could pay a debt of your own by passing along your half of the wood. The stranger who took it could collect the money when it came due, or pass it along again. Do you see what that is? A transferable promise. An IOU you could give to anyone, a bond made of wood, centuries before paper bonds were common, government debt you could literally hold in your hand and trade away. So ask the strange question this whole thing keeps whispering. What is a debt, really? Not the stick. The stick is just wood. A debt is two people agreeing to remember the same thing. One owes, one is owed, and the wood only holds the memory steady between them. Split it, and each carries half of a shared promise. Money, at its very root, might just be memory you can pass from hand to hand, a way of not having to trust your own forgetting. Now, why on earth did this last so long? Paper came. Printing came, double-entry bookkeeping, the neat ledgers of columns came, and still the Exchequer kept cutting sticks. Part of it was that wonderful security. No paper signature was as honest as a grain of wood, but part of it, to be honest, was pure stubbornness. Institutions hate to change a thing that works. The Treasury had always done it this way, so it kept doing it this way, for hundreds of years after it needed to. And then, at last, the law caught up. An act of Parliament in the 1780s ordered the records onto paper, but the sticks kept being cut until 1826, and so by the 1830s, there were mountains of them. Centuries of obsolete tallies, piled up, useless, taking up space. Nobody wanted them anymore. So somebody had a tidy idea. Burn them. On the 16th of October, 1834, 2 whole cartloads of old tally sticks were carried down beneath the House of Lords, to the furnaces in the cellars, the stoves that heated the building, and the workmen began feeding the dry old wood into the fires. Now here is the thing they did not think about. Those furnaces were built to burn coal, and seasoned willow burns hotter and faster than coal. All that ancient bone-dry wood roared up far hotter than the stoves were ever meant for. The heat poured into the flues, the chimney passages, and overheated them. By evening, the copper plates of the flues were glowing, a chimney caught, and then the building caught. Through that night, the medieval Palace of Westminster burned to the ground. The old halls, the chambers, centuries of history gone in the flames. It was the largest fire London had seen since the Great Fire of 1666, the largest, in fact, until the bombs of the Blitz a century later. Crowds lined the river to watch, and among them stood the painter J.M.W. Turner. He painted the blaze, the sky itself on fire over the Thames. Later, the writer Charles Dickens mocked the whole sorry episode. A government, he scoffed, that burned down its own house tidying up old sticks. And he was right to laugh, and right to wince, because the cause was so painfully, beautifully absurd. The fire that destroyed Parliament was started by bureaucrats destroying their old financial records. The accounts in the end did not balance. They burned the house down instead. Caroline Shenton tells this whole story in her account, The Day Parliament Burned Down. And it is the standard telling of how a kingdom set fire to itself with its own bookkeeping. Now, before you walk away with too neat a legend, be honest, because there are some lovely stories about tallies that simply stretch too far. You will hear that these sticks were England's secret money for 700 years, a debt-free people's currency passed hand to hand in every market. It is a romantic idea, but the economist Geoffrey Hodgson and others have looked hard at it, and the evidence that tallies circulated like everyday cash is thin. They were mostly government records, and the assignable ones traded among a limited circle, often at a discount, not in every villager's purse. You will also hear that all of England's financial history burned in 1834. That is overstated too. What burned were the redundant wooden sticks. Vast amounts of parchment records survived, safe in the archives. The memory was not lost, only its wooden shadow. And the famous claim that a man named Henry I invented the tally around the year 1100? Treat that as tradition, not proof. Tallies were used in England before the Normans ever arrived, and the Roman writer Pliny the Elder mentions notched tallies way back in the 1st century. The stick is far, far older than any one king. So hold the wonder, but hold it honestly, and now come back to your own pocket, to your own ordinary day. You will never carry a notched stick of willow, but you carry the words. When you buy stock, you are holding the longer half. When you settle the score, you are clearing the notches between you and another. When a teller counts out your money, the name itself remembers the tally. When you tally up a bill, you are still counting in cuts of wood. Every one of those is the ghost of a promise carved into a hedgerow branch, and underneath them all sits that quiet, ancient truth. A debt was never really a thing, it was a trust. Two people agreeing to remember the same number together, and handing each other a piece of wood so neither would have to remember alone. So ask yourself if a debt is only a shared memory. What is the oldest promise you are still keeping, with no stick to prove it? Leave it below in a single quiet line, if you like, and the next time you settle a score, run your thumb, just for a second, along the edge of the word, and feel somewhere underneath it the grain of the wood.